David Peterson had been working in the salvage yard at Kepler Station for nearly 40 years. His hands were rough and scarred from decades of cutting metal and handling sharp edges. His face was weathered by the harsh light of the solar panels that powered the massive orbital station. He was not a young man anymore, but he was still strong, still capable, and still the best salvage mechanic that Kepler Station had ever seen. The salvage yard was David's entire world. It was a place where old ships came to die. Broken vessels that had traveled through space for decades, their engines worn out, their hulls damaged beyond repair, their systems failing one by one. David and his crew took these ships apart piece by piece. They removed the valuable metals, the rare components, the working systems that could be sold to other ships or recycled into new technology. It was honest work even if nobody else thought it was important. David's crew consisted of 5 people. There was Thomas, who had worked with David for 23 years and could identify a valuable component just by looking at it. There was Catherine, the engineer, who understood how every system in a ship worked and could fix almost anything. Robert was the structural analyst who knew how to safely remove heavy sections without causing collapse. Emily managed all the inventory and kept track of what they had taken apart and what was valuable. Henry was the security officer who made sure nothing was stolen and that the work site remained safe. On a Tuesday morning in early March, a new ship arrived at the salvage yard. David was in his office drinking coffee when Emily came through the door with a strange look on her face. "Boss, you need to see this," she said. David followed her to the docking bay. The moment he saw the ship, he knew something was different. It was not like the other vessels that came to the salvage yard. The design was unusual, almost beautiful in a way that most ships were not. The hull was smooth and curved, with no sharp edges or unnecessary protrusions. The color was a deep blue-black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The symbols on the side were not in any language David recognized. The docking manifest was strange. It listed the ship as Storage Unit 7742, with no owner information. The note said the vessel had been in impound for 6 years because the original owner had failed to pay storage fees. Nobody else wanted to buy it. After 6 years, the station put it up for auction. David bid on it. The other salvagers at the auction thought David was crazy. They laughed when he purchased the unusual ship for such a low price. But David had been doing this job long enough to trust his instincts. There was something valuable about this ship. He could feel it. He did not know what it was, but he knew it was there. 3 days later, David and his crew began the work of understanding what they had purchased. They used scanning equipment to map the interior of the ship. They checked for any signs of damage or hazards. They tried to access the computer systems to understand what the vessel had been used for. Everything they discovered made David more curious. The technology inside the ship was unlike anything David had ever seen. The power systems worked on principles that should not have been possible. The computer systems were far more advanced than any human technology. The materials used in the ship's construction were not standard metals or composites. Thomas ran the scan 3 times because he did not believe the first results. "This does not make sense," Thomas said, staring at the data on the screen. "These power readings are impossible." "What do you mean impossible?" David asked. "I mean the reactor is producing energy far beyond what its size should allow. And the efficiency is perfect. There is no waste, no heat loss. Nothing like this should exist." Catherine came over and looked at the readings. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Boss, I think this is not a human ship." The words hung in the air between them. An alien ship. Here at Kepler Station. In their salvage yard. For 3 weeks, David and his team studied the vessel with careful attention. They mapped every system. They documented every component. They tried desperately to access the encrypted databases and locked computer files. Most of the data remained hidden behind security protocols they could not break. But they learned enough to understand that this was advanced technology from a civilization far beyond Earth's current level of development. It was on a Thursday afternoon when Catherine called David to the lower section of the ship. She had found something in the vault chamber, deep inside the vessel where the most important systems were kept. "You need to see this," Catherine said, and her voice was filled with wonder and uncertainty. David suited up in a protective exoskeleton and followed Catherine through the narrow passages of the ship. The vault chamber was small and heavily reinforced. In the center of the room was a large cylindrical pod made of material that David could not identify. The surface was covered in symbols and ancient markings. A small green light pulsed steadily on one side of the pod. "What is it?" David asked. "I ran the scanner on it," Catherine replied. "Boss, there is something inside. Something living. Or something that was living. I think it is in some kind of stasis. Some kind of sleep. David stared at the pod. His heart was beating faster. A living creature. An alien being, preserved in this ship for an unknown amount of time. Can you wake it up? David asked carefully. Catherine moved to the control panel beside the pod. She studied the symbols and tried different combinations. Her fingers moved across the smooth surface and slowly lights began to flash. The green light became brighter. The pod hummed with energy. The cylinder began to open. A figure emerged, stepping out of the stasis pod slowly and carefully. The being was tall, with smooth silver skin that seemed to shine in the light. Its eyes were large and intelligent, and they held the weight of countless years. The creature was humanoid in shape but clearly not human. It looked at David and his crew with those ancient eyes, and when it spoke, its voice was calm and tired. I am Executor, the being said in perfect English. I have been waiting for someone to find this ship. I have been waiting for a very long time. David Peterson stood frozen in the vault chamber, staring at the tall silver-skinned figure that had just emerged from the stasis pod. The being called itself Executor. It spoke English perfectly, as if it had learned the language from human textbooks. But its voice carried an accent that David could not place, and its eyes held the weight of centuries. You speak English, David said slowly, uncertain if this was a question or a statement. I speak many languages, Executor replied. Your species developed language long ago. I learned it from the ship's database. Language is one of the most important tools of any civilization. Catherine and the rest of the crew stood behind David, their faces showing fear and confusion. They had never encountered an alien being before. Nobody on Earth had. This moment should have been impossible. Yet here it was, happening in their salvage yard at Kepler Station. Executor looked at David with those ancient eyes. You purchased this ship. You own it now. That means you own me in a sense. Or perhaps I own you. The relationship is unclear in this situation. Why were you in that pod? David asked. How long have you been asleep? 40 years, Executor said. I placed myself in stasis when I first arrived at this ship. I did not know if anyone would ever find it. I did not know if it was safe to wake up. But your readings of the vault chamber triggered the stasis pod's alarm system. It began the wake-up sequence automatically. I had no choice but to emerge. David nodded slowly. 40 years. The ship had been in impound for 6 years before he bought it. Executor had been sleeping in this vault the entire time, waiting in darkness and silence. What is this ship? David asked. Why is the technology so advanced? Executor walked slowly out of the vault chamber, moving with careful steps as if his legs were not completely certain of their function after so many years of stasis. His eyes scanned the interior of the ship with recognition and something that might have been sadness. This ship is called the Archive, Executor said quietly. It is the last of its kind. It contains something very valuable. Something that entire civilizations would kill for. Something that could change the future of space itself. What could possibly be that valuable? Thomas asked, his voice uncertain. Executor turned to face them all. When he spoke, his voice became harder, more serious. It contains the entire history of the Galactic Dominion. It holds genetic records from 10,000 different species. It contains the technological blueprints for advanced systems that your civilization will not understand for hundreds of years. It holds knowledge that could make any species the most powerful in the galaxy. And it holds secrets about civilizations that existed long before your Earth was even formed. The words seemed to echo in the small metal corridor of the ship. David felt the weight of what Executor was telling him. This was not just an old vessel full of valuable scrap metal. This was something far more important. Why would you hide such valuable information in a salvage yard? Catherine asked. Why would you let it be forgotten? Executor looked away, his ancient eyes distant and sad. Because I was running. I was hiding from my responsibilities. I was running from power and influence and the endless complications of controlling an empire. You controlled an empire? Emily said, her voice filled with shock. I was the Emperor of the Galactic Dominion, Executor said simply. I ruled over thousands of worlds and billions of beings from dozens of different species. I held the power to make decisions that affected the lives of trillions. And I was tired. I was so very tired of the constant war, the endless conflict, the political games that never ended. So I left. I abdicated my throne and placed all of my knowledge into this archive ship. And I hid myself away in stasis, hoping that one day, perhaps someone would find this ship and do something meaningful with this knowledge. David could not think of what to say. The being standing before him was not just an alien. He was the former ruler of an entire galactic empire. He was far older and far more powerful than David had ever imagined. Before David could respond, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors. A voice came through the communication system, speaking urgently and with panic in its tone. All personnel alert status. Multiple unauthorized signals detected approaching Kepler Station. Unidentified vessels. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. This is not a drill. Multiple high-powered weapons signatures detected. All personnel moved to secure locations immediately. David's face went pale. He looked at Executor. What is happening? Executor's expression changed completely. His ancient eyes became sharp and focused. When he spoke, his voice was filled with grim certainty. Someone has detected the archive signature. Someone across the galaxy has recognized the unique energy patterns of this ship. They have informed others. Now multiple factions are coming to take it. How can they know? Robert asked. The ship has been here for years. Nobody knew what it was. Catherine accessed the main computer systems, Executor explained. When she did, the ship sent out a standard location beacon. A signal that it is here and operational. Any advanced species that knows what to look for will recognize that signal immediately. And believe me, there are many species that would recognize it. David moved to the nearest communication panel. He called his security chief, Henry, who was in the station's control room. Henry, what is the status of those ships? Boss, we are getting information from station authorities. The ships belong to at least 3 different factions. We have never seen their designs before. Station authorities are demanding we provide information about what is on your salvage vessel. They want to know why military ships are being attracted to the station. Tell them nothing, David said firmly. We are leaving. Get the ship ready for immediate departure. He turned back to Executor. We have to go. If all these factions are coming here, they will tear the station apart looking for this archive. We have to leave before they arrive. Executor nodded slowly. Yes. But once we leave, we will be hunted across space by beings far more powerful than you can imagine. Are you willing to accept that consequence? David looked at his crew. Thomas, Catherine, Robert, Emily, and Henry. These were the people he had worked with for years. These were his friends. And now they would be running from an entire galaxy. But David had spent his entire life fixing broken things. He had spent 40 years taking apart damaged ships and making something useful from the wreckage. He was not about to abandon this challenge now. Yes, David said. I am willing. Let us leave immediately. The archive ship disengaged from Kepler Station with a violent shudder that threw David and his crew against the metal walls of the corridor. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel as Catherine fought with the unfamiliar controls, trying to pilot a ship she did not fully understand. Behind them, through the observation port, David could see 3 massive warships entering the station's vicinity. They were sleek and dangerous, covered in weapons systems that made David's heart sink. How long until they reach us? David shouted over the noise of the engines. 20 minutes, maybe less, Catherine called back, her hands moving frantically across the control panel. This ship is not built for speed. It was designed to stay hidden, not to run. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with effort. Boss, I have been studying the archive's data files. This ship has defensive systems, but they are not activated. If those warships open fire before we can, then we activate them, David interrupted. Executor, where are the weapons systems? Executor stood calmly in the center of the bridge, observing the chaos with the detached expression of someone who had seen far worse in his long life. The weapons systems are in the lower section, but they require authorization codes that I can provide. However, I must warn you that using military force against those warships will only draw more attention. More factions will come. More civilizations will join the hunt. David made a decision that would change everything. Instead of heading toward open space where they could be caught in the vast emptiness between planets, he turned the ship toward the asteroid field that orbited near Kepler Station. It was a dangerous maneuver. The small rocks and debris could damage the ship. But it was also the only place where they might lose their pursuers. Catherine, take us into the asteroid field, David commanded. Full power to the engines. I do not care about damage. Just get us in there. That is insane, Catherine said, but she was already adjusting their course. The archive ship plunged into the asteroid field at dangerous speed. Massive chunks of rock and ice flew past the observation port, missing the hull by what felt like mere meters. Alarms shrieked as the shields flared under the impact of smaller debris. But David's instinct was correct. The three warships could not follow at the same speed. Their larger, more rigid frames could not navigate the chaotic dance through the asteroids. They had to slow down. It was David's first victory, but he knew it would not last long. "They are scanning for us," Thomas reported, studying the sensor data. "They are using some kind of tracking system. I think they are following the archive's energy signature." David turned to Executor. "Can we hide the energy signature? Can we make the ship invisible to their scanners?" Executor shook his head. "Not invisible. But we can mask it. We can make it appear that the ship is in multiple locations at once. The archive's database contains emergency protocols designed to confuse enemy tracking systems. They were created thousands of years ago, but they may still be effective against modern sensors." "Do it," David said. "Emily, come with me. We need to modify the ship's systems." What happened over the next 6 hours was a combination of desperation, creativity, and pure luck. David and his crew worked frantically to turn the archive into something it was never designed to be. A refugee vessel. A smuggler's ship. A tool of survival. Thomas rerouted the power systems, creating redundant pathways so that if one section was damaged, the others would continue functioning. Catherine removed unnecessary components and rebuilt the engine's fuel injection systems to increase efficiency. Robert carefully mapped the ship's interior and created hidden compartments using scrap metal as camouflage, making it appear that entire sections of the vessel did not exist. Emily managed the inventory of supplies, calculating how long they could survive without resupply. Henry coordinated their movements and kept watch for pursuing ships, alerting them when enemies got too close. But the most important work was David's. David took Executor's military protocols and threw them away. He did not follow standard engagement procedures. He did not use tactics that made sense from a military perspective. Instead, he did what a salvage mechanic would do. He improvised. When the ZYX collective warships approached again, David vented the ship's coolant system into space, creating a massive false heat signature. The enemy ships focused on chasing this phantom thermal bloom while the archive escaped in a different direction. When the merchant consortium vessels appeared from another sector, David did something completely unexpected. He broadcast a peace message directly to their command ships, offering to negotiate. The message was nonsensical and filled with garbled data, but it confused their commanders long enough for escape. When Imperial fleet remnants tried to corner them near a space station, David simulated a catastrophic engine failure. The ship's systems appeared to shut down completely. The enemy ships moved closer, thinking they had captured an easy prize. Then the archive's engines suddenly roared to life, and David flew directly through their formation at top speed. The pursuing ships could not react fast enough to catch him. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It should not have worked. But it did. Executor watched these tactics with growing amazement. In all his centuries of military experience, in all his years commanding the greatest warships in the galaxy, he had never seen anything like this. A salvage mechanic with no formal training was outmaneuvering military forces that should have destroyed him in minutes. "Your tactics are without military precedent," Executor said to David one evening, as they rested in the ship's command center. "They are not military tactics," David replied, drinking water from a recycled container. "They are improvisation. They are what you do when you do not have enough firepower, so you use your brain instead. I have been fixing broken ships for 40 years. You learn to work with what you have. You learn to adapt." 2 weeks into their flight, something unexpected happened. The merchant consortium and a group of Imperial fleet loyalists actually attacked each other. They were both searching for the archive in the same region of space, and their tension finally exploded into open conflict. David watched the battle on the sensors and understood something crucial. The galaxy was fragmenting. The power structure was breaking apart. Without the archive as a central authority, every faction was beginning to fight for dominance. That was when David realized they could not keep running forever. They needed a solution. They needed something that would force all these factions to cooperate rather than fight. It was an impossible idea. It was completely insane. But then again, so was a salvage mechanic piloting an alien ship across the galaxy while being hunted by an entire civilization. David called Executor to the bridge. "I have an idea. But you will think I am crazy." "I already think you are crazy," Executor said. "But please continue. Your crazy ideas seem to work better than my logical ones." David Peterson stood on the bridge of the archive ship, staring at the communication system. What he was about to do was either the bravest or the most foolish decision of his life. He had spent the last week preparing, working with Executor to understand the archive's most powerful systems. And now, finally, he was ready to put his plan into action. "Are you certain about this?" Executor asked, watching David with those ancient, worried eyes. "No," David said honestly. "But I am tired of running. And I think the only way to stop all these factions from tearing each other apart is to make them work together." David activated the communication system. He opened a broadcast channel that would reach across multiple sectors of space simultaneously. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. "This is David Peterson of the Human Salvage Crew. I am broadcasting from the archive ship. To all factions searching for this vessel, I have a proposal. Stop fighting each other. Stop hunting us. Instead, send your representatives to an abandoned moon in the Kepler sector. In 72 hours, we will meet in a neutral location. We will open the archive. But the archive will only unlock its most valuable secrets if representatives from all major civilizations work together." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle across the galaxy. "If any faction attempts betrayal, if any ship fires weapons, if any faction tries to seize the archive by force, I will activate the self-destruct sequence. The archive will be destroyed completely. All its knowledge, all its technology, all its secrets will be gone forever. Is that clear?" David ended the transmission and looked at Executor. "It is a bluff, right? The archive does not actually have a self-destruct sequence that will destroy everything." Executor smiled slightly, and for the first time, David saw something like approval in his ancient eyes. "It does. I programmed it myself 3,000 years ago. I have never actually used it, but it exists." "Good," David said. "Because I meant every word of it." 72 hours later, the abandoned moon was filled with ships. Representatives from the ZYX collective arrived first. They were a strange species, their bodies resembling large insects with multiple limbs and chittering voices that had to be translated by machines. They were militaristic and calculating, and they viewed every negotiation as a battle. The merchant consortium arrived next. They were humanoid beings with pale skin and cold eyes. They spoke only about profit and value. Every word they said was designed to increase their advantage. The Imperial Fleet loyalists came in massive warships that dwarfed everything else. They were humans, David discovered, or at least descendants of humans who had evolved differently in distant star systems. They wanted to restore the old empire to its former glory. Then came the Aquari Collective, a species of telepathic beings whose consciousness was shared across thousands of individual bodies. They communicated without speaking, which made everyone deeply uncomfortable. And there were others. 7 more species in total, each with their own agenda, each viewing the archive as the key to domination. David's crew worked frantically to establish genuine neutral protocols. Thomas set up defensive barriers that would trigger if any weapons were activated. Catherine modified the archive systems to create a fail-safe that would actually destroy everything if David gave the command. Robert established secure communication channels so that no faction could monitor what the others were saying. Emily created a detailed inventory of the archive's contents, making sure every faction understood exactly what they would gain if they cooperated. Henry stood guard, armed and ready, though David knew that Henry's physical weapons would be completely useless against the military forces assembled here. When all the representatives were gathered, Executor made his entrance. The effect was immediate and profound. The room fell silent. Every being present seemed to recognize something ancient and powerful in Executor's presence. The ZYX collective stopped their chittering. The Merchant Consortium representatives stood straighter. The Imperial Fleet loyalists actually saluted. "I am the former Emperor of the Galactic Dominion," Executor announced, his voice carrying authority that needed no amplification. "I abdicated my throne 400 years ago. I have been in hiding ever since. But I have come out of hiding because I must speak to you all about what will happen if you continue down the path you are on." Executor activated the archive's visual systems, and images began to appear on screens throughout the assembly chamber. They showed ancient wars. They showed civilizations that had been destroyed by weapons of terrible power. They showed the suffering of trillions of beings who had died because their rulers fought for dominance. "This is the history of the Galactic Dominion," Executor said. "This is what happens when one species controls the archive's technology and uses it to dominate all others. This is what will happen again if you continue to fight for this knowledge." A representative from the ZYX collective spoke, its voice translated by machine. "But with the archive's technology, we could achieve perfect order. Perfect efficiency. We could eliminate all chaos and suffering through unified control. You could also eliminate all freedom," David said, stepping forward. Everyone turned to look at the human salvage mechanic. I'm nobody. I own a salvage yard. I fix broken ships. But I have learned something important over the past few weeks. The only way to prevent domination is to make sure no one can dominate. The only way to keep the peace is to give everyone enough power so that nobody benefits from starting a war. The Merchant Consortium representative laughed. You suggest we share the archive's technology equally? That would make us all equally weak. That serves no one's interests. It serves everyone's interests, David replied. Because if we all have similar technology, we are forced to negotiate rather than fight. We are forced to cooperate. That is better than constant war. That is better than living in fear. Then David revealed his final card. I have already distributed fragments of the archive's data to hidden nodes throughout the galaxy. The complete knowledge is not here. It is scattered across 1,000 locations. You can fight us and seize this ship, but you will only get pieces. The only way to get the complete organized archive is to work together. The only way to use this knowledge effectively is to cooperate. The assembled leaders looked at each other. Executor stepped forward again. I propose the creation of a galactic council. All species represented equally. All decisions made through consensus. The archive's technology shared among all members. And I will serve as mediator, ensuring that no faction attempts to dominate the others. There was silence in the chamber. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, representatives from different species began to nod. The Merchant Consortium calculated that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. The Aquari consensus mind reached agreement that unified cooperation would benefit all consciousness. Even the ZYX collective, after careful analysis, accepted the proposal. One by one the leaders stepped forward and agreed to the Galactic Council. The accord was signed. The archive's doors were opened. And a new era began, not with conquest or domination, but with cooperation. David Peterson, the salvage mechanic from Earth, stood beside Executor as the leaders departed. He had saved the galaxy not with weapons or military strategy, but with improvisation and the simple belief that cooperation was stronger than conflict. 6 months had passed since the formation of the Galactic Council. The archive's technology was being shared among all civilizations in careful, measured amounts. Executor served as mediator, guiding disputes between species and ensuring that no single faction accumulated too much power. The fragile peace held, though barely. Old suspicions and ancient rivalries still simmered beneath the surface, threatening to explode at any moment. But David Peterson was not in space anymore. He had returned to Earth. The planet that David had left behind seemed small and ordinary compared to what he had experienced across the galaxy. The cities looked tiny. The problems seemed insignificant. And yet, Earth was burning with a different kind of conflict. The Human First movement had grown while David was away. They were a militant faction of humans who viewed David as a traitor. They believed that he had given away technology that could have made humanity the dominant species in the entire galaxy. They had stockpiled weapons. They had built military installations in secret locations. They had begun recruiting soldiers, preparing for a conflict they believed was inevitable. The leader of the Human First movement was a man named Richard. He was charismatic and powerful, with the ability to inspire fierce loyalty in his followers. When David returned to Earth, Richard was waiting for him. The confrontation happened at United Nations headquarters in Geneva. David had requested an address to the General Assembly, and Richard had demanded the right to respond. Both men stood before the cameras, before the world, about to argue for the future of humanity itself. David Peterson was the greatest opportunity humanity ever had. Richard spoke first, his voice filled with passion and anger. He had access to the technology of an entire galactic empire. He had the power to make humanity unstoppable. Instead he gave it away. He shared it with aliens who will eventually use it against us. He made us weak when we could have been strong. The crowd in the assembly chamber murmured. Richard's words resonated with people who feared the unknown, who wanted security, who believed that strength came only from military power. David stood and walked to the center of the chamber. He looked exhausted. His clothes were simple and worn. He looked nothing like a hero. He looked like what he was, a salvage mechanic who had stumbled into circumstances far beyond his control. My name is David Peterson, he began quietly. I'm not a politician. I'm not a military commander. I'm not important. I own a salvage yard. I fix broken ships. I take apart derelicts and make something useful from the wreckage. He paused, letting his words settle. When I first found the archive ship, I thought I could sell it for a fortune. I thought I could make myself rich and powerful. That was my instinct. That was what most people would have done. But then I learned something. I learned that if I tried to keep that technology for humanity alone, every other civilization would attack us. Every faction would fight to take it from us. We would be at war forever. David moved closer to the assembly representatives, speaking with simple honesty. I have seen what happens when one species tries to dominate all others. The archive contains records of civilizations that destroyed themselves trying to achieve total power. Trillions of beings died because their leaders believed that strength came from weapons and control. The old emperor learned this lesson after 400 years. It took him 400 years to understand that domination does not bring peace. It brings only endless conflict. Richard stood again. But what about human interests? What about our survival? If we do not arm ourselves, if we do not prepare for war, we will be conquered. No, we will not, David said firmly. Because every other civilization is thinking the same thing. Every species fears domination. That is why the Galactic Council exists. Not because we are all suddenly kind and peaceful, but because we understand that nobody benefits from war. We all have enough power to hurt each other, so we all have incentive to cooperate. David looked directly at Richard. You want to make humanity strong through weapons. But weapons only work if your enemy is weaker than you. The moment your enemy gets better weapons, you lose your advantage. The only real strength is a system where fighting benefits nobody. Where cooperation is the most profitable path. Where even former enemies choose to work together because the alternative is destruction for everyone. The assembly chamber was silent. David continued, his voice growing stronger. The Galactic Council is not perfect. It will not prevent all conflict. But it makes total domination impossible. No single species can accumulate enough power to conquer all the others. That is real security. That is real strength. Not weapons. Systems. Richard's face was dark with anger. You have betrayed humanity. History will remember you as a traitor. Maybe, David said. Or maybe history will remember me as a salvage mechanic who helped fix a broken galaxy. After the assembly ended, most of humanity listened to David. The Human First movement remained, still preparing for conflict, still believing in armed dominance. But the majority of Earth's nations agreed to join the Galactic Council officially. Humanity would share in the archive's technology. Humanity would have a voice in galactic affairs. Richard and his followers disappeared, retreating to secret bases, still waiting for the moment they believed war would come. But war never came. In the following weeks, David declined an offer to join the Galactic Council as a permanent representative. He did not want power or influence. Instead, he returned to his salvage yard at Kepler Station. But the salvage yard had changed. Now, working alongside Thomas, Catherine, Robert, Emily and Henry were salvagers from 6 different species. A ZYX technician with multiple limbs worked alongside human engineers. An Aquari consciousness inhabited several worker bodies, coordinating complex operations. Representatives from 3 other species contributed their own expertise and perspective. David's small salvage operation became something unexpected, a symbol of what genuine cooperation could achieve. Different species, working together, sharing knowledge, combining their different ways of thinking to solve problems that none of them could solve alone. One evening, David and executors stood together on the hull of the archive ship, looking out at the vast darkness of space. Countless stars stretched before them, each one representing a sun, a planetary system, a civilization. "Do you regret your choice?" Executor asked. His ancient eyes were finally peaceful, finally at rest. "You could have pursued power. You could have reshaped the galaxy in humanity's image. You could have become emperor yourself." David smiled. It was a simple, genuine smile. "I am a salvage mechanic," he said quietly. "I fix broken things. I take what is damaged and make it useful." The galaxy was broken. Broken by fear. Broken by the belief that strength comes only from domination. We fixed it. Not perfectly. Not completely. But we fixed it enough. That is enough for me. The 2 beings stood in silence, watching the stars. Above them, the galaxy continued its slow dance through the void. It was not a galaxy without conflict. It was not a galaxy without problems. But it was a galaxy learning, slowly and imperfectly, to work as one. And that was something worth fighting for.